Moin and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Portugal united Iberia. When speaking of Iberia, I mean of course the one Iberia we all know, and not the one Iberia of the Caucasus. Portugal, Spain, Andorra, and yes, even let's include Gibraltar. Portugal compared to Spain is rather small, and there are sometimes questions how Portugal could survive or just be independent. There was even this one time where we had actually the Iberian Union, but Portugal was never politically included within Spain, so it was mostly a personal union. The King of Spain was the King of Portugal for some time. Portugal was created as a county, and it was the county of Portugal-led, or before it was also called Portuguese, and it grew by conquering, of course, parts of the Moorish Iberia together with the predecessors of Spain. So we had the Kingdom of Leon, Castile, and so on. Algarve and parts of Morocco, they marked the end of the Reconquista, of course. Portugal then adapted to their geography. They expanded in the sea instead of staying on the land. They also made a lot of trade, which led to the exploration of Africa, India, and also many other parts like Indonesia or China. Macau and Timor-Leste are good proof of it. And they also ventured into Japan, where they didn't really have a good experience, the Japanese, and today the word pan in Japanese comes from the Portuguese word pan, which means bread. And then of course Brazil, which nowadays is the biggest Portuguese speaking country in the world. Portuguese sailors, captains, military guys, or the navy, everything that had to do with the sea, be it part of the navy or the army or whatever, they were known to be very good explorers, adventurers that brought knowledge, treasures and pride to the Portuguese. Portugal also used to be a country of innovation, especially when it came to ships, how to construct them, which wood to use, which technique to perform, sailing of course. So they were one of the first countries to build really large ships with good sails, so they could sail very far away and in a comfortable way for those times. And of course the technologies around it, where you had the compass, the telescope and many other things as well. And then we also have the alliance between Portugal and England, which proved to be very beneficial, and I would go so far and say that this alliance saved the existence of Portugal. Without it, the Portuguese would probably for real be part of the Spanish kingdom. Spain, on the other hand, or Castile, they grew out of the Kingdom of Leon, then conquered much of the Moorish Iberia, and later Isabella and Ferdinand united Castile and Aragon, and it is known today as Spain. But what if we all changed of this, and Portugal, instead of Castile, became the force to unite Iberia? After the Moorish invasion, much of northern Spain and northern Portugal became part of what is known as Kingdom of Asturias. A Visigothic nobleman, he founded this kingdom, and he and his supporters were the last ones to escape the Islamic rule. This stopped being the case in 910, where the kingdom was split into three, where Leon, Galicia and Asturias were created only to be united by Leon again in around 924. The country of Castile split from Leon in 931, and Portugal, which already was an independent county, not country but county, became totally independent in 1136. So let's say that from here on Portugal somehow manages to get Galicia and parts of Leon, be it through marriage or conquest or other things. From here on, with more manpower, this united kingdom could make bigger gains in the south, while Castile would also still conquer some parts, but it would be less than in OTL. The problem in here is that the kingdoms in northern Spain and Portugal, they always split, then reunited, and then they were conquered by each other, then they split again. So it was just a coincidence that Castile just became the biggest player in here. Portugal had big chances to do the same as Castile in that sense. So this is nothing where we have to use ASB stuff or magic, of course. Much of the Reconquista would follow the same road, and the history of Iberia won't see major immediate butterflies. A major point would be the succession crisis of Castile. With a bigger Portugal in the years of 1366 and onwards, they would most likely get the crown. They were geographically close, they had a lot of ties with Castile probably in this alternate timeline, and they could just send their troops without any difficulties. Support from any other faction or from the outside would be so difficult to get because we would have the Pyrenees, the sea, and until then the Portuguese would already establish what they would seem as useful for them. If things won't change too much for Aragon, a Portuguese candidate for the throne could be chosen instead of a Castilian one after the extinction of the House of Barcelona, because Castile wouldn't exist and Portugal would be a big player. A Portuguese king would be strong enough to face countries and kingdoms like France, for instance, and in the worst case scenario, Portugal or the Portuguese kingdom could jump in and defend Aragon against the French. And of course such a war would be very disastrous for the French, because the Iberians, they could just retreat to the Pyrenees and just drain out all the resources of the French. The kingdom of Aragon would still be somewhat independent, but follow its own policies, especially for Sicilia, Sardinia and Naples, which again would put them at odds with France because they had a lot of ideas to conquer stuff around there. Portugal would probably also be at odds with France because of it, and together with England, another reason to be at odds with France, England, Portugal and Aragon, they would have this triple alliance to face the French. I don't know when exactly Aragon would become integrated, but it would just happen, and it would only be a matter of time until this would happen, and a similar thing such as the Iberian wedding would happen. The name of Portugal will be Portugal, of course. However, once all of Iberia is united, there is this common misconception that then everything would be called Portugal. No, then we will still have the name of Spain or Hispania, because all of this region used to be known as Spain as well. So we say for Portugal and Spain today, nowadays, Iberia, because we cannot just count Portugal as Spain. But in those times when Spain actually wanted to rename themselves as Spain, the Portuguese, they complained about it because they were also part of Spain, but geographically, not of the kingdom. Anyways, Portuguese would be the most widely used language, and all other languages except for Basque, of course, they would be determined as sub-language or dialect of the Portuguese group. Due to a bigger Portugal and more influence over European policies, the Portuguese would take a little bit more time until they would go and refocus or shift towards the Atlantic. They would still go for Morocco, even potentially get more territories than in OTL, but eventually, and especially with the fall of Constantinople, trade and exploration would become very important and crucial for Portugal, and the shift would happen anyways. The Portuguese would not care so much for European policies because they cannot extract any resources or something useful, except when they are attacked, of course. I mean, then you will just defend your lands. And with the trade route from Africa and India, well, they would get very rich. Except for the Italian possessions, which they might even lose after some time or just sell, Portugal would try to not intervene in any European affairs whatsoever, and they would just deem it as useless or too costly. Eventually, the Portuguese would discover the Americas from the African coast of Cape Verde, but it would still again take some decades until the Portuguese would do more stuff with Brazil, because they had already such a good trade from India, from Africa, from China, from Indonesia, that it would just seem like a costful adventure. The Portuguese kept many trade routes secretive, and it is said that they already went before Columbus to Brazil or even Newfoundland. As a result, the Portuguese could get almost all of what is known today as Latin America, because they would just try to keep it secretive. And there would be actually some interesting changes, especially for the Incans. The Incans, they had a bloody civil war when the Spanish came because of the sickness that spread from Europe, and thus they were in a problematic situation where many people died, and also the people who should reign, the kings and the successors, but all of them died, so there was this vacuum and nobody knew who would rule it. Of course, Portuguese coming a bit later, this means that the Incans would already be a bit more stable or have split, but it would be a very, very different situation, and the Portuguese, they would never have a chance to just take over all of the Incan Empire. I mean, if you want to face and have a war in the Andes Mountains, well, good luck. You will really, really need it. The Aztecs, on the other hand, are a different story. Yes, Mexico has also mountains, but compare these mountains with the mountains that we have in the Andes. And also then the Aztecs, who would still do human sacrifices, and then also the other kingdoms around them who just hated the Aztecs. They would ask the Portuguese to help them. Well, the Aztecs, they are doomed. And many satellite kingdoms, they would survive under Portuguese hegemony in Mexico. This Latin America will become very different than OTL's America for a few reasons. It will certainly have a higher amount of black people, because the Portuguese controlled the slave route and the slave trade, but also more whites. A good example for this is Brazil. All of Latin America will speak Portuguese. The Portuguese won't lose control of Brazil due to the Dutch or the French, because that happened when the Portuguese, they were in the Iberian Union. So this leaves only the English, who would perhaps get a few islands in the Caribbean. Under the Portuguese, we won't see an Inquisition, and we won't have a caste system. This might give Latin America a better time than in OTL. Lisbon won't just be a capital, it will be a world city, a world capital. Sugar trade, gold trade, wares of China, from India, from Africa, Americas, all of them, they will pass over Lisbon, and with this immense wealth accumulated, it will see an extremely extraordinary development. And even with earthquakes and natural disasters, Lisbon would still be unrecognizable from OTL's Lisbon. And we would see different architecture, more people living in there, immigration. We would just have a much more different version of Lisbon. And this city would rival London or Paris during these years, or even onwards. With a Portuguese-dominated Iberia, the Habsburg will never rule Spain, and much of Western Europe will be different. But I still think that some things such as development and the rise of absolutism in France will exist, the independence of the Netherlands as well, religious wars of course, the American independence, and a Napoleon-like figure, or at least a full-scale invasion in Iberia, which would result to the transfer of the court to Brazil. It is certain that some countries of Latin America will want to have independence, but with the court present in Brazil, much of Latin America will see a development and not pure exploitation. Of course, we will have a development which will only be beneficial for a certain elite of this country, and probably also a pro-Portuguese elite, but only this tiny development will already give a major difference and a major good start for the Latin American countries. From this point on, Portugal will focus for some years to get Latin America back, but just as the Brits with America, they would fail. Africa would later be split between them and even perhaps India, while the French and the potential German or Italian state, they would just get nothing or just get very tiny parts out of it. They would feel alienated and they would probably search to somehow make conquests within continental Europe. This would leave them very angry with the Portuguese and the Brits, and this could potentially leave us into a war scenario between continental Europe minus Iberia and the Brits plus Iberia. Who would win? The empires of the sea or the land powers? And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.